Good morning, everyone. I'm Julia De Luca. I'm Vice President at the Investment Banking Department at Itaú BBA, covering technology. So any transaction of middle-sized companies in the technology sector. When you think about strategic transactions, it would be both private placement or M&A. So fun fact, it's my third time at Websummit, and I got to know that I was going to do a keynote on Sunday. So this is like a last-minute presentation, and I hope it's valuable for all of you. So before talking about Latin America as a whole, we need to look at private markets globally. So when we look at 2024 and 2025, we are seeing a recovery from the low levels that we saw, for example, in 2023. An interesting data point is that obviously due to the big transaction of OpenAI that was of 40 billion, one out of every 5 deals globally were directed to artificial intelligence. When we shift gears and look at Latin America, this is not true. So Latin America, fintech continues to be very representative. It's obviously the sector that we have more innovation due to the central bank and its recent regulations and being pro-competition and DREX, open banking, etc. But I think it's interesting to point out that while artificial intelligence is, yes, globally, a very important sector for investors, in Latin America, we are still lagging a bit behind. When we look at the recent transactions of the region, I think that it's interesting to point out that we are seeing a lot of transactions over the 50 million USD mark, which is very relevant. It points out that investors are betting in the region and investing significant amounts. Back in 2024, 2023, early stage investment didn't change much in a sense that it continued. We continued to see money flowing to early stage. But when we looked at growth stage, the investors were shy. Towards the end of 2024 and now in 2025, we are seeing important deals and important investors coming to the region who have never before invested. So we saw Bond Capital, we saw Summit Partners, recently we saw Sequoia back in the region. So these are all good signs that regardless of the macro environment, which is obviously very tough right now, investors are still betting here. But the next challenge is the exit, right? So I've been watching a lot of keynote presentations, and I've seen partners of venture capital funds saying that IPO should not be the exit that you're looking for, and rather M&A or M&A with an important strategic partner. The fact is that with the IPO window closed, especially in Brazil, so there's not been an IPO in Brazil for more than 3 years now. M&As are becoming even more relevant and even more an exit for the early stage venture capital funds and also for the founders to gain scale, to go to other geographical regions, to diversify their product. So here are just examples of globally, right? Deals that happened in both Latin America and globally. I think that one takeaway from this slide is that we are now seeing global companies invest in Latin America. So obviously the multiple is not the multiple that we saw in 2020 or 2021, but still we are working in several deals within the investment banking department, and we are seeing the US firms that sometimes don't have even operation here in Brazil looking at these assets. So if you are a founder and you are trying to think about your next move, a good M&A might be a possibility. So in this sense, M&A in tech in Brazil is becoming even more relevant. So as you can see on the slide, we put together the number of deals in total in M&A activity in the year of 2024. So we have 1,476, out of which 35% were what we consider tech, TMT, digital services, M&A. So they are becoming relevant by the year. And on your right side of the slide, I've selected a couple of recent deals that were emblematic for the region and also extremely important. So to start out, Visa acquired Pismo for $1 billion. It was a very interesting transaction. The multiple was double digits contracted revenue. So it was a very interesting transaction. The second one, Riverwood Capital invested $40 million in PayTrack. I personally worked in this transaction. So PayTrack is an expense software and travel from Blumenau in Santa Catarina, and they were able to raise with Riverwood Capital, a global investor. The next transaction is an example of how U.S. companies are looking at the region to invest, was the transaction that I also had the honor of working with the transaction Corpay acquiring Gringo for 1 billion BRL. So Gringo is basically, if you don't know, it's an app for drivers that you can deal with your licenses, you can pay your IPVA, etc. And Corpay, which is also the owner of Sem Parar, acquired the business for 1 billion BRL. It was a very good exit. We also did the deal of Experian and ClearSale, also an example of a global guy looking locally to our solutions. The bank also worked in this transaction. And B3, our local stock exchange, buying Neurotech, a software. So this is all to say that M&As are happening, and they should be happening even more this year. So why do M&As happen? Basically, you have to have a proximity between what the buyer is willing to pay and what the seller is willing to sell their company. So here we see the equity value next 12 months revenue multiples. I think it's interesting to see that when you look at the median, we are at around 5 times next 12 months revenue. So not actual revenue, future revenue. When we look at top growth companies, we are at around 19 times. Looking at the actual conclusion of this slide is that when you look at Latin America, we do have a discount compared to our global U.S. peers and compared to all of the multiples that are being seen in the U.S. So I would say that a transaction close to double digits, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times, while might sound low given what we saw in 2020 and 2021, it's a very good multiple right now. So if you're a founder, keep this number in mind. And finally, in my last minute, as I said, we are facing liquidity constraints. So the IPO window is closed, exits are harder, and founders, you can find your path to liquidity. But bear in mind that you have to work, I would say, more your numbers and your scale before getting there if you want to do a full outright sale. Obviously, as I mentioned, the IPO window closed. We have regulatory hurdles when we look at Latin America ex-Brazil. So Brazil currently represents around 60 to 70% of the volume that we see in investment in Latin America. But the other countries are becoming even more representative. So Mexico, for example, still faces a bit of regulatory hurdles. And finally, infrastructure and bureaucracy. While I also believe that Brazil is very good in its 3G, 5G, and infrastructure, we did a good job. There are other countries that are still lagging behind. But I think that we should wrap up in a positive tone, because technology in Latin America is actually in its best moment to found your company, so to start your company now. With artificial intelligence, you can take your product easily to do an MVP and try it out and try again. So I think it's a good moment to start a company, in a sense that you have investors that are more down to earth, and also founders that are now understanding that they cannot burn cash and pay for growth. So we're seeing a new batch of very good founders. So it's a good moment to start your company. Finally, we're seeing nearshoring trends, in a sense that since Latin America is strategically positioned next to the U.S., and obviously everything that's happening in the U.S. Economy, other emerging markets are, to a certain extent, not wanting to do business with the country. We have a very good opportunity. Open finance initiatives are becoming even more relevant. So the central bank is, despite its change in governance, is working on DREX. So I still believe in a lot of potential for fintech in Latin America. And we are seeing early stage investments increase more than growth rounds. So while growth investment is becoming like the 50 million threshold is becoming more common this year, if you are an early stage founder, funds are willing to invest despite being more rigid and with more expectation from the founders. So, final remarks. Resilience. I think it's important to be resilient in a market where you have to face regulatory hurdles, you have to face volatility and the VIX increasing in the US by the day, FX problems, but be resilient. Opportunities. There are opportunities in Latin America, and still we have lots of room for improvement in our lives. So I think that Latin America offers a great opportunity to start a company. And finally, how to do everything. I think it's easier for me to talk on stage and harder to implement it every day. But use these forums and everything that you see here. It's a great gathering to engage in the ecosystem, meet new people, understand what everyone is doing. We have several US investors here. Talk to them, understand what they are seeing, get advice. The technology sector has my heart because everyone helps each other. And despite the challenges, we still have a lot of opportunities ahead. Thank you very much.